Hi everyone, and welcome to the Scrap and Create YouTube channel. It's Christine here, and I am here with part one of my Stamperia Wonderland 7x7 mini album. I will be condensing this tutorial into three parts. Part one, which is this video here, will be the actual book itself, making the book and the binding and the pocket pages for this album. Part two will be coming next, and that one will be creating the customized pages. And then part three will be decorating the album. And then, of course, there is a walkthrough to this album so you can see the finished product before you even get started with the tutorial. And I will link the walkthrough in the description box of this video down below. Also, each video will have in the description box below, you may have to click the show more button to see all the information typed there. But in that description box below will be the cut list for each section of the tutorial. So for example, for part one, your cut list down below in the description box will include all the cutting measurements to create the book, the binding, and the pocket pages, if that makes sense. So for this beautiful album, we are going to be using the amazing Stamperia Wonderland papers. I used 2 packs of these for this album. And this paper is absolutely gorgeous. This is my first time working with Stamperia and I'm hooked. Love, love, love this paper. Okay, so you'll need 2 packs of the Stamperia Wonderland collection if you would like to make the album exactly as I have made it. Some other supplies that you're going to need is, of course, a paper trimmer. You're going to need some glue. I prefer art glitter glue. We'll be using this mostly in the third video where I will be putting my design paper on. I put all my design paper on with art glitter glue. And for the construction, I use score tape. 3/8 of an inch score tape is my favorite size. I will be using the art glitter glue for one part of this part one tutorial. I probably won't use it at all in part two for the actual construction of the pages, but then like I said, I use it for all of my adhering of all of my design paper into my album. You can get score tape and you can get your art glitter glue at scrapandcreate.com. That's scrap, the letter N, and then the word create all together.com. If you buy the art glitter glue, I buy this small bottle with this tip that comes separate and this little pin that it is rust resistant. It's awesome. And then I have a big, huge bottle that you can also buy at Scrap and Create that I just use to refill this small bottle. This tip right here really lets you get tiny little beads of glue on your project, which I find very useful. So you'll need your adhesives. You will obviously need a pencil, maybe a little pick tool to help you take the backing of the score tape off. You'll need a bone folder, some scissors. This is a perfect trim ruler. I use it to help tear my score tape. You could, if you don't have this, you could also use an acrylic block if you're into stamping. A ruler is helpful. Then of course, as I said, your paper trimmer and then some type of scoring board. I use the Martha Stewart scoring board, but whatever scoring tool you have will work. Even if you have a paper trimmer with a scoring blade attached to it, that will work as well. All right, so that's the materials that we need. Now let's go ahead and get started. This, as I've stated, in this video, we are going to be creating the actual book itself. Now, I decided, and I always decide before I get started on a project, I just go through the paper. And I kind of let the paper speak to me, and I let the paper help me choose what size I want my pages to be. So for this particular album, I decided I wanted my pocket pages to be 7 inches by 7 inches. So that meant that I needed to have my book my covers be 7.5 by 7.5. I like to have my covers a 1/2 inch larger on each side than my pages. Just gives the book a lot of nice room for the pages, and if you have a couple things sticking out, they're not going to go beyond the covers and that sort of thing. So the first thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to grab some chipboard. You can get this at scrapandcreate.com. I use its medium weight chipboard, and you want to cut 2 pieces to 7.5 by 7.5. And this is going to be your front and your back cover. You also need to cut a spine piece. In most of my albums, I do 4 pages. So if you're the standard rule of thumb, if you're doing 4 pages, is that the width of your spine is 2.5 inches. And then the length is simply whatever length your covers are, in this case, 7.5 inches. Okay, so again, those measurements will all be down below in the description box of this video, but your two covers are 7.5 by 7.5, and this is 2.5 by 7.5. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and move our supplies out of the way. The first thing that we want to do once you have your chipboard pieces cut is we want to cover this because the chipboard isn't exactly lovely to look at, right? So what we want to do is cover our chipboard with cardstock. I decided to use white cardstock for this collection. I thought it went beautifully with the papers. So what you want to do is you want to grab two pieces of 12 by 12, whatever color you like, cardstock. Again, mine is white, okay? And then what you want to do, let's put our chipboard aside for just a moment here. And what you want to do is you want to cut your 12 by 12 down to 9.5 by 12. So each of these is 9.5 inches tall by 12 inches wide. The reason that I did that is because I know that I only need an inch on each side of my covers to properly cover them. I need an inch of space along the top, along the side, and along the bottom. So I just did the math and I knew, okay, I need to make the height of my cardstock to cover 9.5 inches since I need 2 extra inches, right? And this is 7.5. So you just add 2 inches and you get 9.5. The next thing you want to do once you have these cut down to 9.5 is you want to grab your scoreboard and you want to grab your bone folder. On one piece of the cardstock that you've cut down to 9.5 by 12, put the 12-inch side across the top of the scoreboard and score at 1 inch. This is just going to help give us a guide as to where to place our chipboard covers and spine. And I find this works really well for me. I'm then going to turn in 1/4 of a turn so that the 9.5 inch side is at the top, and then you're going to score again at 1 inch. I've already done this, so I'm not going to rescore it, but just to give you an idea. On the second piece of cardstock that you've cut down to 9.5 by 12, you only want to score on the 9.5 side at 1 inch. So you don't need that side inch as well, just along the bottom there. Okay, you can put your scoreboard to the side for a moment here. The next thing that we want to do is we want to grab a piece of score tape because we need to connect these two pieces of cardstock together so that they are connected, and then it's one big unit that we can use to cover our book, our covers, our chipboard covers and spine. So what I like to do is I just take a piece of 3/8 of an inch score tape, and I'm just going to put it along the short end, the one that we did not score. Okay, so the short end of our first piece of cover cardstock. So we've scored on this side and along the bottom. So it's this other side that we didn't score on that I'm placing the score tape. Does that make sense? Okay, so now I'm going to take my bone folder and I'm just going to give this tape a nice burnish, and then I'm going to turn it, and we're going to now connect these two pieces of paper together like so. Okay, so I'm going to turn it this way so it's a little bit easier for me to see, and not all the paper will be on camera for a minute here, but I'll try to show you the most important part, which is just the connecting of the two pages. I'm going to tear off just a little bit of the score tape backing, and that just will give me a little bit of room to maneuver this if I don't set it down perfectly straight to begin with. So all I'm doing is covering the tape. I'm making sure that I have this lined up with the score line at the bottom, because remember we did both of these along the bottom here at 1 inch, and you also want to make sure it lines up nicely at the top. All right, that looks good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of the score tape backing and then just give this a nice burnish. So now these two pieces are nice and connected, and there's that little seam there showing where we connected the two pages. So we're going to flip this back over now, and now it's time to place down our chipboard. So I always like to do a dry fitting first, which just simply means you just kind of place it on there without putting any adhesive down quite yet, just to make sure that everything fits properly. So what we're going to do is, here's one cover. So here's one 7 by 7 7.5 by 7.5 cover. And it's going to line up. Remember, we did a score line here and then a score line along the bottom that creates this little tiny, if you can see it here, this little tiny square here at the bottom where they connect. And that corner is a great way to make sure that we have our first cover here nice and lined up and straight. That's why I do those score lines. So if I line it up against this score line and this bottom score line, make sure it's snug in this corner here and perfectly aligned with this corner. That way I know that this is going to be straight, and then everything else will follow this and will end up being straight as well. Then I'm just going to kind of place the little spine piece here, place the back cover. The only thing you want to make sure of is that this seam, you want to leave little spaces in between, and we'll get to that in a minute, but in between each cover and the spine you want to leave a little 1/8 of an inch or so space. So that's why I'm dry fitting this, just to make sure, because you do not want the seam that you created where you connected the two papers, you don't want that seam in that gusset space in between. And it looks like it's going to be fine. That seam can either land you in the middle or somewhere along your spine or somewhere along your back cover. Either way will be fine. You just don't want it in the space in between. Mine's not. Mine's going to be on my back cover, so that looks great. So it's time to go ahead now and lay our chipboard covers and spine on this connected cardstock that we've made. You want to make sure that you have plenty of score tape along the back here. So I've already applied my score tape and burnished it. So all I need to do now is remove the score tape backings here. As you can see, I kind of just do a perimeter and then make an X in the middle. And then I'm going to use my glitter glue in just a minute to fill in the little spaces. Some people like to put score tape along the entirety of the back of the covers, and that's perfectly fine. If you're more comfortable with that, by all means, go ahead and do that. I try to save as much score tape as I can. It's you know, it's certainly not cheap, but it's absolutely necessary in making mini albums. So, you know, when I can, I just try to take little shortcuts and not use too much of it. So, I found that this works for me. But again, if you would like to have your covers completely covered with score tape, that is absolutely fine. You can do that. You would just ignore this step here. I do cover the complete back of my spine piece with score tape. It's much smaller, it doesn't take as much score tape, and also your spine is your most important part structurally of your book. Your spine and your binding are the most important structural part of your book. Can't say that enough. So you definitely don't want to scrimp in the score tape on those mechanisms. Okay, so when you have, I should have showed you this before I took the backing off, but there are two different sides to your medium weight chipboard. There's one side here, look how bendy that is. See, can you guys see how bendy that is? You do not want to put it down that way. You want to turn it so you have the less bendy side. See, now I can barely bend that. And that's what you want to put down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just lining this up. If my head's in the camera, I apologize, but you really want to get over this, line it up. And I know these score lines are hard to see on camera, but you'll be able to see them if you're making this project along with me. And you want to make sure that you have your first piece here, your cover, nice and aligned with this score line, and then fit nicely in that corner. That looks great. So now I'm just going to take my bone folder and burnish this down. Okay, now I mentioned earlier that we need a little space in between each cover and the spine, right? What I like to do, because I happen to have some, is I like to take an 1/8 of an inch score tape and I just stick it right down along, I butt it right up against here, this cover, okay? And I'm just going to use my little perfect trim ruler to tear it. Again, you could use an acrylic block to tear your tape, or just your fingers. It doesn't really matter. I just find that this is a little easier to work with. I'm going to burnish this tape down. Now, if you don't have 1/8 of an inch size score tape, I do recommend it. I only use it for this part, and I've had this roll forever. So I do think it's a good idea, but if you don't have it, it's no big deal at all. You can take your Tim Holtz ruler, which the width of the top of the ruler is 1/8 of an inch. And so you can just set it up against your cover, right? And then go ahead and just stick your See how it covers that score tape perfectly? It's exactly 1/8 of an inch. So that would work too. You can take your Tim Holtz ruler, just put a little, you know, just hold it there and then get your spine stuck down and you'll still have that 1/8 of an inch gap. Or if you don't have a Tim Holtz ruler, you can take some extra chipboard that you have from cutting your pieces and glue, just make yourself a little shim or something. Glue, obviously you probably want them to be the same size, but I just have these sitting next to me. Just glue 3 pieces together and that will give you that 1/8 of an inch gap as well. So those are kind of 3 different ways you can do that. All right, so let's go ahead now. Keep the backing on your 1/8 of an inch score tape if you're using that for right now. And we're gonna go ahead, you wanna put on the back of your spine piece, you wanna fill it completely with score tape. As I said, you don't wanna scrimp on score tape on your binding mechanism or your spine, because structurally that's the most important part of your book. So let's go ahead and remove the backing here of this score tape. Again, if you want to use a little pick tool to help you remove the backing, they're great for that. And I usually almost always use the pick tool when I'm attaching my pages to my book. This came with my Cricut, but they actually, I think, sell them separately. I've never used it with my Cricut, but it's great for digging in and scooping the backing of the score tape off. It's awesome for that. If you find that you have any tape that's hanging off of any piece of your chipboard as we're working, just make sure you kind of use your finger and push it in a little bit. We just don't want that sticking out. Okay, so now it's time to adhere the spine to the cover here. And we're just gonna butt it right up against this 1/8 of an inch score tape. Again, if you're using your ruler or another mechanism, you know, you just hold that there while you get it in place. So just make sure that it's straight against the score tape and also that score line. Remember, we have that score line along the bottom. Make sure that it's nice and straight along the bottom of that score line so that it stays nice and even throughout as we're making this. We just want our covers and our spine to be nice and even and straight across with each other along the top and along the bottom. All right, so that looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and now burnish it with my bone folder. And then finally, last one, I'm gonna do one more piece of 1/8 of an inch score tape. Again, you can use your ruler or another method, however you choose, but you do want a little bit of space here. If you've made enough of these, you really can't eyeball it, which is what I usually do, but when I'm teaching, I definitely like to, you know, kind of just not eyeball and show you guys how to get it, you know, as perfect as we can. It's homemade. Always remember that. We're making projects from scratch here, so they're never going to be absolutely perfect. Don't be too hard on yourself. The purpose of this is to have fun. All right, so now we just need to place that second cover, which is our back cover, onto the cardstock. Remember, now that I don't have the adhesive exposed yet, I can really show you. One side's really bendy, you want that going vertically. I'm sorry, horizontally. And you want the non-bendy side, the one that's harder to bend, is how you want to place it down, with that going up and down like that. Okay, so I've already placed a lot of score tape along the back. Again, I just did the perimeter and an X. I'm going to use my art glitter glue in just a moment to go ahead and fill in the little tiny gaps where I didn't put score tape. But if you want to put complete score tape, that's perfectly fine. A lot of folks do that, and it's perfectly fine. I have just found for me that this works, and so the little bit of score tape that I save, it's worth it to me, but you're not wrong to do it, you know, any way you want, really. There's no right or wrong in this. I'm just showing you guys how I make these albums, and I mean, I'm by no means an expert. This is a hobby for me. I've been making albums for a really long time, several years, probably 5-6 years. It's a lot of fun for me, and I'd like to do my memory keeping, so it's a great way to keep memories. And I also give them as gifts, and let me tell you, these are hits as gifts, and they're so fun and easy to do. All right, so now we just want to butt this up against the score tape again, and make sure also that we're even against that score line along the bottom. If my head is in, I apologize. You just really want to get over this and make sure that you're straight across the bottom. And it can be kind of hard to see that score line. I know you guys don't see it on camera at all, but I can see it here, and you will be able to see it in person, you know, if you're following along with me and doing the project. All right, so we're gonna go ahead now and burnish this one down. Okay, so we have completed this part of getting our book covered. Now what we want to do, remember I said at the beginning that we only need 1 inch on each side to really cover this book. And we have plenty of extra here. What I want to do now is just trim this down so this isn't too cumbersome to work with. So I'm just going to take my ruler and a pencil and I'm going to mark over 1 inch, because again, that's all we need is 1 inch. And then I'm just going to grab my paper trimmer really quick and trim that little bit off. All right. There we go. Okay, easy peasy. Super easy to do, but I like to trim it. I just find it's a lot easier to work with when you just have 1 inch on each side. And now that fits into the camera too. So extra bonus, right? All right, the next thing that we want to do is we're obviously going to be using this white cardstock that we have taped all this down to cover our book so that our book will match our pages. Of course, you can use any color you want. I just happen to choose white for this particular project. So before I do anything else, I already am just starting to bend this paper. You just want to get the paper introduced to the idea of what you're going to be wanting it to do, kind of showing it who's boss and which way you're going to want it to bend. Okay. So I like to just kind of go around before I do get into my next step and start the bending process of that paper. Just kind of putting the little grooves in the paper so it's starting to understand, if you will, that it's going to need to bend this way eventually. All right, I'm going to grab my pick tool now and I'm going to remove the little backing of my 1/8 of an inch score tape. Again, if you did another method, you would to make this little space, then you would not have to obviously remove the score tape backing if you don't have score tape there. So you can omit that step, obviously, if you did it another way. Okay, now we want to grab our 3/8 of an inch score tape. Again, you can get this at Scrap and Create. This is my favorite size, and as you'll see if you continue watching this tutorial, I use this size for all of my page constructions pretty much. Very rarely will I use 1/4 of an inch for something. But yeah, basically I almost always use 3/8. Okay, so let's go ahead and put it all along, put your tape all the way along the bottom of the cardstock, and then you're also going to do the bottom of, the bottom of the chipboard, and then you're also going to do the bottom of the cardstock. Now you don't need to go all the way into the corner, just do the length of the actual chipboard. Okay, so go ahead and get that tape down and tear it off here. You're going to turn this and do the same thing now across the top. So put it on the chipboard all the way across, and yes, you're going right over top of those spaces. And then do the same thing on the actual cardstock itself. Okay, this is the end of that roll of my score tape, so let me just cut that out, and now I'm going to grab a new package. By the way, this is what how they come packaged. So you can hit this at Scrap and Create. It is the best size, and I use it almost exclusively. All right, let's finish this down here. Get that down there, and then all the way to the edge of the chipboard, and go ahead and tear it. Now we're going to do the same thing on the short sides. So let me flip it up there. Can you guys, hopefully that's on. Yeah, that's on camera. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. So you do the chipboard first, give it a little tear, and then the cardstock. Again, you don't have to go all the way to the corners, just the length of the chipboard. Come down, and then we're going to flip it, and we're going to do the same thing on this end. So do your chipboard and your cardstock. Super easy. Okay, all right. Now you want to go ahead and grab your bone folder, and we want to give all of this tape a really nice burnish. Take your time with this and really burnish this tape. I don't think I quite understood at the beginning when I first started making mini albums just how important burnishing was. So I would give it just a little, boom, boom, and then I'd be done. And I have found that the more that you burnish, first of all, the easier it is to tear off the backing of that score tape. the better that that tape sticks into the paper or chipboard or whatever you have it stuck to, and the better your book is going to hold up over time. So really take your time and make sure that all of that score tape is nice and burnished down. Now, again, as I said, this is going to be covering this chipboard, but we have to do something about these corners, because if we cover it like this, that's bulky and that's ugly. So we have to do what we call mitering our corners. So we have to do this to all four ends. Now, if you have a perfect trim ruler, you can use this, and you would want to use the 0.125 end, and all you do is you just use the ruler. The ruler is self-explanatory, and it will tell you exactly how to position the ruler. You grab your pencil and make a line, and that's where you're going to cut. If you don't have one of these, it's no big deal. You can take your Tim Holtz ruler, which is basically, let me just back up. You want to leave 1/8 of an inch between the corner and where you cut the corner of your chipboard rather, and where you cut the rest of the cardstock off. So you can take a ruler, measure 1/8 of an inch from the diagonal and just trim, or you can take your Tim Holtz ruler, which is exactly 1/8 of an inch, and just butt it up against the corner of that chipboard and draw your line. And that's what I'm going to do, because I find that is the easiest and quickest method. But again, all you need to do is grab that ruler and make 1/8 of an inch, leave about 1/8 of an inch space. If you don't leave the 1/8 of an inch space, then what you might have, if you cut too much away, then that corner might peek out, and you don't want to see that chipboard corner. It just doesn't look very pretty. Now, if you were using black paper and that happened, you could probably cover it up with a Sharpie. But when you're using different color paper, like we are today with this white, you definitely, kind of don't want that chipboard corner showing if you can help it. All right, so now I'm just going to cut with my regular scissors where I drew these lines. Okay, last one. Okay. And as you can see, if you look closely, you can see there's just this little tiny space between the corner of the chipboard and where I've cut it off. And that's exactly what you want, about 1/8 of an inch. And that's going to help us really get a nice corner to our book. So it's going to look like a real little book when we're done. Okay, so now I haven't removed any tape backing yet. I'm just, again, bending and folding this paper so it kind of gets used to going in the direction I want it to go in. So I'm just bending, getting it nice and ready to go before I start removing the tape. Okay, so once you've got your, you can give it a little burnishes. Just be very gentle when you're burnishing at this stage, because you don't want to burnish too much. You don't want to, accidentally tear your paper or put a hole in it or anything like that. But basically all you're doing at this stage is just getting that paper ready. I'm getting ready in just a moment to take off the score tape backing. So I'm just getting that paper nice and ready to go where I want it to go. Okay, so on your long sides now, go ahead and remove both sets of tape backing. So the backing on the cardstock and the backing on the chipboard. We've burnished this really good, so that's going to pop right off for you. I'm going to turn it this way and then go ahead and remove the tape backing here. And on this cardstock piece as well. And then on the short sides, for now, just remove the score tape backing from the chipboard. Leave it on the white cardstock for now, or whatever color cardstock you're using. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to fold over the long sides first and go ahead and stick them down to the chipboard. So, again, you can just start again with getting that paper ready, and then you can kind of lift your book up, really get it going, really get it bending. Oops, I left part of the backing on. Okay. And then go ahead, and I like to start in the middle and stick that middle down, and then spread it and stick it from the middle and then out to the ends. Does that make sense? So I always kind of start in the middle And then we're giving it nice burnishes here to get it nice and stuck down. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing up here. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing and get it nice and stuck down. I have a little bit of tape that has kind of come over the cardstock a little bit, so I'm just kind of bending that down so I don't get stuff stuck to me. And then again, start in the middle and then just kind of work your way out as you stick this down. Give it a nice burnish as you go. And make sure also to burnish inside the little gaps that we made between the spine and the covers. Just give a little burnish there. Okay, now it's time to do the sides. Remember, we cut a little bit off the corners, right? We mitered our corners. So now we have this little tiny piece here. All you want to do is tuck this little tiny bit that's hanging out right up top with your bone folder, and just tuck, or you can use your finger and just tuck it right into that cardstock. I'm sorry, the chipboard. So now you're tucking it in right on top of the chipboard. What that does is it alleviates that little kind of pointy edge to your book, okay? The pointy edge to your corner by tucking that tiny excess in. And then we're now ready to go ahead and remove the score tape on the cardstock on the side. And then the same thing, I like to kind of, bend it a little bit and then start in the middle and work my way down on each side, like so. Okay. And as you can see, we have nice corners now on the outside. And that's what I'm worried about. I don't really care too much what it looks like on the inside, because in a minute we're going to cover this up. But it's the outside that you want to have nice corners. So that's what I'm worried about, is how it looks on the outside. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to tuck in this little bit of excess paper, and we're just tucking it in with our bone folder, or again, you could use your fingers, but we're just laying it right over top the edge of this chipboard. So then when we turn this, or fold it in, it's not gonna have that excess little pointy edge that you sometimes get. If you do get a little pointy edge, you can always just trim it off after you've got it stuck down. That's not a huge deal, but by tucking it in, you just kind of alleviate the need to do that. And as you can see, we now have nice corners here on our book. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and burnish all this down really good again here. And then you don't want to take these pieces and automatically just close the book up. You want to kind of work into it. So I'm going back into these little gaps that I created here with that 1/8 inch space. And I'm just sort of letting the paper go into those gaps while slowly bending it up. And once you've got that done, then your book will be ready to close like so. All right, so there's our book. As you can see, our seam is on the back. That's perfectly fine. You just don't want that seam in your spaces in between your spine and cover. But being on the back there is perfectly fine. So this is our book. It's time now to go ahead and do our binding, which is the next step. We want to put our binding into our book. Again, as I said, this is going to be a 4-page mini album. You need to decide all of that, of course, before you get working on it. But as I said at the beginning, this is going to be a 4-page pocket page mini album. So what you want to do is you want to grab a piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, whatever color you're using. All right, and you want to cut it to 8.5 by 7. So you want it to be the same height as your pages. Remember, our book is 7.5 by 7.5, the covers, but our pages are 7 by 7. So you want the height of your binding to be the same height as your pages. Okay, does that make sense? And then the length just ended up being, once I trimmed it down, 8.5. So if you want to go ahead and cut it now to 8.5, that's fine. What you want to do now is grab your scoreboard. And I've already scored this, but just to demonstrate, I always start at 1.5 inches because I like 1.5 inches on each side of the binding. Okay, so you just want to score at 1.5, then at 2, then 2.5, then 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, and 7. So you're scoring every 1/2 inch from 1.5 through the number 7. And then I left 1.5 inches on this side as well. Okay, I know it's very hard to see these score lines. So what I did is I flipped this over and I numbered them. This really helps, especially if you're new to mini album making. So I do recommend doing this, especially if you're new. And let me explain. I'm just using a pencil. Nobody's going to see back here. This is going to go down in our book. So we don't have to worry about this showing up. So what we know we need is we have 4 pages, right? So what I've done is I have numbered each space in between these score lines. So we have 11 spaces. 1 and 2 are going to connect together to create the hinge for our first page. Number 3 is going to be our gusset. The gusset is simply a fancy word for the space in between each page. And I like 1/2 inch gussets in between my pages because I like to do a lot of flips and flaps in my pages. And that 1/2 inch allows me the space to do that. So I'm just going to put a little G at number 3. 4 and 5 are going to combine together to create the hinge for page 2. 6 is going to be the gusset. Another 1/2 inch gusset. 7 and 8 are going to combine to create the hinge for page 3. Number 9 is going to be our final gusset, and then 10 and 11 are going to combine together to create the hinge for page 4. So what that means is I'm going to flip it this way, and I'm going to grab my 3/8 of an inch score tape, and I am going to put score tape on 2, 5, 8, and 11. Now, I will tell you, some people like to put score tape on both. Okay, 1 and 2 have to connect, right? So people will put score tape on 1 and 2, and that's perfectly fine. I have just found that just doing one piece is sufficient. And so again, as I've stated before, I like to try to save score tape when I can. So for me, just experimenting and doing this over the years, I have found that just one strip of the score tape on the hinge mechanism part is fine. At one point, we moved 3 different times in a year. And of course, all my books that I made moved with us 3 times in a year. And they all withstood the move just fine with me doing it this way. But if you feel more comfortable putting the score tape on both of the hinges that are combining, that is perfectly fine. Please feel free to do so. I'm just saving my score tape. If you're doing that though, remember to never nothing gets connected to the gussets, no tape at all until we put it in our book. Okay, so leave those gussets alone. So I'm going to go ahead now, where we've written G. I'm going to go ahead now and burnish this tape. And then before I take any tape off, I'm first going to bend 1 into 2. So I'm just going to fold here and give it a nice burnish. Now I'm going to remove the backing of the score tape that's on number 2. If you put it on both, remove both backings. Okay, so in other words, if you put tape on 1 and 2, which is perfectly fine, remove both the backings, and then you're sticking 1 and 2 together. Now on the front, we have the dented side of the score marks that we made. And so that is where you fold back. That's your kind of cue to fold back. And if I turn this over, you can see we now have our first hinge. You guys see that? All right, so let's keep going though, okay? We don't want to we're just gonna work on the back first, and then I'll show you what we do on the front. Okay, 3 we are leaving alone. Do not put any sticky, make sure nothing sticks to 3. So 4 now needs to go into 5. So I'm going to fold 4 into 5. I'm dry folding, right? Because I don't want to, I want to get that creased before I take the tape off. Now I'm taping the tape backing off of 5 and then repeating that fold of 4 into 5. Now again, we have this next on the front, on the other side of the paper, we have this dented side of the score line that we made. That's our cue to fold back at that particular point. When we're done, all you will see on the back are our 3 gussets. So the only numbers that you will see when we are completely done with this process are the ones we label with a G, which is 3, 6, and 9. Okay. Next, we want to fold 7 into 8. So I'm going to fold at that score line. I'm going to give it a little burnish, fold it back, remove the score tape, and repeat that fold, give it a nice burnish, and then on this dented side, we pull back. So see, I'm keeping my promise. We're only seeing the gussets. Finally, we have to fold 10 into 11, which is our last fold here. So go ahead and fold it before removing the tape and give it a crease with your bone folder. Fold it back, take that tape backing off, and then fold 10 into 11. One last fold. And then of course on the dented side, This is where we fold back, and there you go. As you can see, now all you can see on the back, all the other numbers are gone because they've been folded into each other, and we just have 3, 6, and 9 left. Can you guys see that down there? Just our gussets are left on the back. So I'm going to give this a nice burnish, and then we want to place score tape along the entire back of this binding mechanism. You do not want to leave any space untaped. Score tape comes in lots of different sizes. It's perfectly acceptable to just go ahead and use your 3/8 of an inch, but I happen to have some larger sizes in my stash. And just to make this process go a little bit quicker, I'm going to kind of use up those a little bit. Actually, that one's out. Let's see if this one's too big. This one might be too big. Look at this guy. Isn't that huge? Yeah, this one will work. So let's go ahead and put this down. Again, there is no benefit to this. You don't have to have these sizes. The only benefit is that you use a little bit less of your smaller sizes of tape. That's the only benefit, and it goes a little quicker when you can use larger sizes of tape as well. Sometimes, though, I will say these larger sizes of tape can be a little bit more difficult to manage, as you just saw. But you know, it does, like I said, it does save time. Okay, too big to put the rest of that there. So what I'll do is I will just grab my 3/8 and we'll finish. Actually, I have a 1/2 inch here. You can get this size at Scrap and Create as well. We'll do some 1/2 inch. The 1/2 inch is going to be too big for constructing your pages and stuff, because I always do a 1/2 inch of a flap. So that's why the 3/8 tape is perfect for page construction. But if you just want a lot of tape to go on the back of something like your binding mechanism, these large sizes are kind of nice to have. Now, like I said, you don't want to leave any space on the back of this uncovered. So I'm going to grab, I have this tiny little space left on this end here, and I'm just going to grab my 1/8 of an inch and stick that down, because I want every single little section covered with score tape. Okay, so that is done. Now what you want to do is you want to go ahead and take your bone folder and burnish this really well. Get this tape nice and burnished down. Now we want to turn it over. And let's bend our hinges now so they're all kind of sticking up a little bit. And I like to just kind of go like this. I like to just really fan them back and forth to get them kind of used to moving, if that makes sense, used to bending on their hinge. Now we want to put 3/8 of an inch score tape on each side of each hinge. When you're doing this, make sure that you put the score tape up at the very top. You do not want any score tape coming down into the crease here where the binding turns, where the page would turn. So keep that score tape right along the top. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do all one side first, and then we'll turn it over and do the other side of the gussets. So see how I have a little bit of space left at the bottom of that page, or of that hinge rather. There's like an 1/8 of an inch left where that is not covered in tape, and that's what you want. Because you're only going to put your pages down as far, when you finally adhere your pages to your book, you're only going to put your pages down as far as you have tape. That way, you don't want to put all of your pages, you don't want to put your pages all of the way down, because then they won't turn very well. So by using the 3/8 of an inch tape and sticking it right to the top of that hinge, that really is going to help you get perfect placement for your pages when it comes time to adhering those pages to the book. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so, whoops. Throwing things over here. Okay, so we have the first side. Now let's just flip it this way, and we will do the other side of each hinge. Same thing, just put that tape right along the top, and then tear it. Hope everyone had a wonderful holiday season and is having a great new year. We did, but unfortunately both my kids were super sick during Christmas. My little one, my oldest one, brought it home on his last day of school, actually, before winter break, and then my little one got it even worse. So, but we had each other, and we still managed to have a wonderful holiday and a great new year, and I hope you guys did too. But that did put me a little behind, so I have lots of projects to share with you guys. I'm just a little behind, but they're coming, I promise. And now, as you can see, I'm just taking my bone folder and I'm burnishing this tape to the hinges themselves. All right. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and adhere our binding mechanism to the inside of our book. Okay, so we want to make sure that we have it centered on the spine, right? And we want to make sure that we have it even. And in other words, the hinges should each come in at a certain, the same measurement in. Oh my gosh, that doesn't even make sense. Let me just show you. Sometimes it's harder to explain in words than just to show you. So we know that our spine is 2.5 inches long. So that means that if we have 4 hinges that need to kind of be evenly spaced in this 2.5 inch spine space, we know that, I'm just getting the ruler right up against that spine. There we go. There it is. Okay. Because remember, we have this these spaces. So you just want to ignore the spaces, get your ruler so that it's just measuring the actual spine piece. And then you want to come over 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. So put a little tick mark with your pencil at 1/2 inch and 2. Okay, and when you lay this down, that's where you're going to want your first hinge and your last hinge to sit. Does that make sense? So your first hinge is going to sit at this little tick mark here, and your last hinge is going to sit at that little tick mark there. Now, in terms of where it needs to be from the top and the bottom, we know that we made our spine and covers 1/2 inch longer. This is 7 inches. This is 7.5. So we just come down 1/4 inch from the top and 1/4 inch from the bottom. And we know that those tick marks are where we are going to want to place this. So when it's all said and done, it's going to look about like that. It is kind of important to make sure that you do these tiny little measurements, simply because it just will help that if that binding mechanism is a little bit skewed, then your pages aren't going to lay right, and it's just going to look a little wonky maybe. So if you just take a second to just do the math and make those little tick marks, it'll be worth it, I promise. Before we actually adhere this down, we want to go ahead and miter the corners of our hinges. Remember, we made our hinges the same size as our pages, which is 7 inches. So when we have our 7-inch pocket pages, it would be basically impossible to fit them on the same exact length as the hinge. So by mitering the corners just a little bit, we alleviate that problem. What I mean by mitering the corners is just like when we're making the cover of the book itself and we cut a little triangle out of each of the 4 corners. It's exactly what we're going to do on each hinge, on each end of the hinge. So you're just going to take your scissors. You're not going to come down here and cut into the gussets. You're just cutting a tiny little triangle out of the hinge itself. There's no proper measurement here. There's nothing, you don't have to worry about math or anything like that. There's no exact right place to cut it. You're just cutting a little tiny triangle off of each end of each hinge. Okay, just like so. Just make sure you don't cut into the gusset, and you won't. It would be very hard to do that, so I promise you'll be fine. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just do it on the other side now. And you'll have little triangle pieces flying everywhere, which are always fun to clean up later. All right, so now that that's done, I'm going to give a nice burnish one more time to all this tape on the back of this hinge mechanism. All right, and then it's time to place this down. All right, so remember your tick marks. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and take the tape backings off here of the back of the binding. They even make sheets of score tape that I have used before for like a binding. You just stick it down and then cut around it. Like huge 8.5 by 11 sheets of score tape. Those are great. They're very expensive though. So I don't have any on hand right now. I think I used them all, but they're nice to have too. But again, not necessary, because all it's doing is saving you maybe a little fraction of time. It's not necessary at all. So whatever you have, you can make this project, I promise. Okay, so I'm going to bring my book, make sure my book is straight. Make sure I'm on camera. Good. Okay. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I am going to line everything up. I'm going to make my hinges straight. And then I'm going to line everything up where I have my tick marks. Over just a little bit. Yes. That looks good. All right. I'm going to stick it down. So once you have it stuck down, I'm going to gently burnish, and I'm actually just using the kind of, not the pointy end, but the other end of my bone folder for right now. And I just am gently burnishing this down. Remember what I said a little earlier in this video? When I first started out, I didn't realize just how important burnishing was. So I maybe just didn't, I did it, but I didn't spend as much time as I probably should have. And over the years, I've learned how important it is, and my books have held up much better for it. And it also have just been easier to construct. So keep burnishing. Make sure this hinge mechanism, remember, this is structurally the most important part of your book, right? So make sure that it's nice and stuck down. I'm not going to spend too much time on camera just because that could be boring, but you know, just go over it several times with your bone folder. Once you've just done what I did a few times more, you know, and just kind of gone in between each of the hinges and got the whole thing stuck down nice and neat, you want to take your bone folder and slightly bend just a little bit where that crease is. Remember those 1/8 inch gaps we put in between the cover and the spine? Well, now we have to go ahead, there was a piece of my hair, we have to go ahead and get this spine, or this hinge mechanism nicely stuck into that 1/8 of an inch gap so that it fits with the book and the book can be closed nice. So basically it becomes one with the book, in other words, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of a weird way to word it, but it just sort of helps everything kind of come together and stick together as one. You can use the softer side of your bone folder too if you like. And as you're doing this, I'm slowly bending this up a little bit, like so, and like so. And then, you know, once you feel comfortable, you can actually sort of start to close the book. But you got to keep the burnishing first and the gentle pulling of the book, of the covers, until you're able to meet them up with no resistance at all. Okay? So now we have, look at that, now we have our binding done. So good job, guys. You have your book and your binding, okay? Next, what I want to do is I want to do a cover inside the front and back covers, okay? And I like to do this just because I think it gives it a more finished look. Now these covers measure 7 1/4 by 7 1/4. Now this one I'm actually think I'm going to make bigger because you see I got this one. This corner looks fine on the outside, but on the inside it doesn't look that great. So I think I'm going to do, let's see. Well, you know what? I'm going to put a pocket there anyway, so I don't think it's going to matter. So let's not worry about that. Sometimes, you know, we all make mistakes, and sometimes you just cut a little too close when I was mitering those corners, but that's okay. You're never going to see it by the time the book's all done. All right, so we'll just keep them at 7 1/4 by 7 1/4. I'm going to use my art glitter glue for this. You could certainly use score tape if you're more comfortable, but I have found this art glitter glue is fantastic, and I even glue my metal accents on with this stuff, if you can believe it. I don't use the that special whatever it is. Oh gosh, I used to use it. I can't think of the name now. But anyway, I have found the art glitter glue is the master of glues. I tell you, it works so well. All right, so we've got this down on this side. And again, this just gives it a more finished look, a more polished look. This is totally optional. You do not have to do these covers if you don't want to. But again, if you want to, they're 7 1/4 by 7 1/4. And they just cover up that chipboard and make it all kind of look cohesive and like one big unit here. Okay, so this is what we have at this point. Our book is done. For now, the actual construction of the book is done. So this is the front, the nice corners here. This is the spine, and this is the back with the nice corners there. Here's our seam that's going to get covered up when we decorate our book. So we are all done with our book. The last thing we need to do is make our pocket pages. I've already done 3 of them. You want 4 total, and it is the same method for all 4. So I will show you one, and then you just want to make sure you do it 3 more times, okay? To give us 4 pocket pages. the way that you do it is you have 2 pieces of whatever color cardstock you're using, and the pages are going to be 7 by 7. So you want to cut these at 7.5 by 7 and score on the 7.5 side at 1/2 inch. Okay, then you want to go ahead and fold on your score lines and burnish that tape and the fold as well. Okay, so we're burnishing, we're burnishing, we're burnishing. All right, and so what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taping these together, flap to non-flap and flap to non-flap, to create our pocket page. Okay, so what you want to do is just take a little bit of the score tape off of one end, or one flap, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and stick this down. Now, the reason I've only taken a little bit of the score tape off is so I have some wiggle room. If I don't get it down perfectly the first time around, I can just lift it right up and fix it. And now I also can wiggle it a little bit. That looks good. I'm going to remove the rest of the backing and go ahead and burnish this down. We're going to do the same thing now to the other end. Now, one thing to keep in mind, go ahead and burnish this other flap really well so it lays as flat as it can. When you just want this to lay naturally on top, okay? What you don't want to do is pull this and then stick it, because then you're going to get a bubble. So you just want it to lay just casually and gently right on top of this little flap here. So I'm going to take off just a little bit of the score tape backing again, like so, and see how I'm just casually bringing it over. I'm not pulling, I'm not doing anything to maneuver it. I'm just letting it fall where it would naturally fall. Okay, that looks good. And so then I'm just going to go ahead and remove the rest of the tape backing. And then here we go. This is our pocket page. So these are the 4 pocket pages that we are going to be using to do all of our flaps and fun stuff. And then these will be adhered to our hinges. So at the end, these will all be going right on top of these hinges, like so. Now I like to do all of my page constructions with my page out of the book. So I'm not going to be adhering these to the book at this time. I will show you how to do that at the end of video number 2 of this series. But if you like to construct your pages with the pages already inside of the book, you can go ahead now and adhere them to the hinges. You would simply just make sure, dry fit them first, make sure that they fit properly on each hinge, and then go ahead and remove the tape and, you know, adhere the pages. And then once they're adhered, as you can see, this is our side pocket for a nice large photo mat. That's why these are called pocket pages. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. This is the end of our first part of 3 parts of our tutorial for the Stamperia Wonderland 7x7 mini album. By saying 7 by 7, that's the page size, the album 7.5 by 7.5. So join me for part 2 coming very soon, where I will show you how I did the customized pages for this particular album design. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks guys, bye-bye.